Thank you. Bruce, you're a hard act to follow. Everybody seems awake, even during lunch. I'm hoping I can continue that run for a little bit. No, it's true, I'm not retired. In fact, if I had been, my phone wouldn't have been ringing off the hook this morning with a problem at work. Oh, wait a minute, did I say that? Ringing off the hook? Yes. Maybe I should be retired. Oh my gosh. Reminds me of this story about this man and woman were sitting at a lunch counter, and the guy points to his wife and he says, "You see that couple down at the other end of the counter? In about 10 years, we're going to look like them." And she says, "You realize it's a mirror, don't you?" Another story, because us old people like telling stories, which comes more to point. Dean and I have talked a lot about equipment and passenger cars because that happens to be my primary area of expertise, along with running passenger trains. And I have the pleasure of working with what was a new startup railroad down in Florida. And last year we hauled just under 50,000 people on Christmas trains. We brought in some of the equipment, and the general manager on the railroad that we were operating on, he says, "Boy, this is nice equipment." And one of my colleagues says, "Well, don't you recognize it? This equipment was on your railroad about 10 years ago." He said, No, that equipment was all junk." He said, "Right, it was junk. We've refurbished it." Oh my gosh. And that's a message I'd like to pass on from an equipment point of view. When we get to the point we're ready to do something, whether it be through refurbished equipment, like Karina was talking about, or new equipment, like you're going to hear from our friends at Bombardier, where there's a will, there's a way, and railroaders, among the things we're notorious for is getting the job done. We'll figure that part out. So have no qualms about that. In fact, I have to say I was kind of intrigued when I heard that we had a representative from Bombardier. I mean, this is a huge worldwide company that said, seems like there might be an opportunity to do something here. That says an awful lot. When we can attract that kind of attention, I think we're doing some things right. I've been involved in trying to do some things up here now for about 15 years or so, and as an outlier, as a Yank from the South, it's fun. I've had the pleasure of traveling throughout Canada, and about 7 times on the Canadian, and it's just an amazing place to be. It's also, I don't have to tell you that, but I can speak with deep and sincere appreciation. It's a hard place to run trains. It's a harsh environment to operate a railroad, and it's beautiful. And boy, speaking of beautiful, that weather that we've got is a little bit of a payback for some of the stuff we've had recently, even more beautiful than usual. But it is a tough place to run, particularly passenger trains, which generally need a little more attention. You've got things like sinks and toilets and air conditioning and heat, mostly heat these days, and those kinds of things. So the operation of a passenger train is more involved. The company I work for, Iowa Pacific Holdings, just finished a run where we operated a train called Hoosier State in conjunction with Amtrak, and we were running equipment on a daily basis over bad track, which doesn't do any good for running gear and air conditioning pipes and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm pretty familiar with the challenges associated with that. One of the things that Dean mentioned that you guys might want to hear something about is a private operator approaching the government for operational funding. And that's why I talk so much about the difficulty of running trains as opposed to the difficulty of acquiring and fixing them up. I know how to acquire them and fix them up for sure. But when a private operator, for-profit operator, goes to the government, that is very difficult. That is, okay, I've got my hand out. And so what I'm going to tell you is what we've got going here, where we've got constituents, that's voters. We've got a coalition. We've got some really exciting things going on. We've got the potential for public-private partnerships to make things work. This is where we make the difference in terms of getting things moved forward. We've got to make the case, and you're going to hear more about that this afternoon. We've got to make the case loudly. We've got to really get attention. And with 6 interviews today, Lucille, thank you. You're getting the attention. That's exactly what we need. We've got to make the case often. We've got to keep pursuing things. We've got to keep talking to people. That's going to be the difference. One of the things that we've discussed and should be discussing is in this part of the world, there are 2 aspects to a passenger train. You've got the aspect of providing pure transportation, getting from point A to point B, and then you've got the aspect of tourism. And these are both important foundations for what we're trying to do. The mobility side of things, big deal. The tourism side of things, also a big deal. Karina mentioned and showed the picture of the old steam locomotive and talked about an economic engine. And that's exactly the words I use when I talk about tourist and excursion railroads, which is part of my expertise. And what we should be talking about for any passenger train we're running through this amazing country. When you are running a passenger train and you're getting people coming in, they're coming in with full wallets, they're leaving with slightly less full wallets, and that's good for jobs, and it's good for the gas stations, and that's good for the bus operators, and that's good for the people that are running the trains, and the hotels, and the restaurants, and all of these things. You start to look at some of the economic studies associated with tourists coming in to ride trains, and the numbers are spectacular. Al Arrington was talking about economic impact a little bit. Don't think that's not a big deal. That's how a lot of these jobs are created. That's how Dean and I started talking some number of years ago. He says, gee, I'm in the motel business. I am looking for people to come in and rent my rooms. And a lot of them ride the train. A lot of them ride the train. One of the interesting things for me is looking at not just the train. I mean, I'll ride a train anywhere. I'm not objective. I love trains. Marie was getting me excited. I wanted to hop on board and go for a train ride. But one of the things we want to keep in mind is when we're looking at running that passenger train, we want to provide more than just pure raw transportation. I look at airlines as pure raw transportation. They'll get you there. It's not always much fun, but they'll get you there. On a train, you've got more room, more opportunity to have some more interesting onboard experiences, whether it be a narration or an explanation or education or just connectivity. One of the fascinating things for me, I was at a conference last week, and one of the seminars was on how to connect with millennials, how to get millennials into your railroad, your museum, things like this. And millennials, by the way, for most of us, means our kids. For some of us, it means our kids' kids. But generally, it's 1980 through about 2000. These are people that, fascinating to me, aren't that interested in driving. They're very comfortable using public transportation. I'm a baby boomer. I drove 13 hours to get here. So I'm kind of wedded to my vehicles, and these folks are not. They're much more amenable to, I'll take the train if the train's got Wi-Fi, if I can connect on a train, if the train is connected to the bus so that I can get to the train, so that when I get off the train, I can get to the next place, I can get to my hotel. And that's something that a lot of rail operations have kind of lost. Classic example, Sudbury. Let's go near the city, but let's not go into the city. That would make it too easy. And oh, by the way, let's make sure that you get close enough to see it, but then it's a burden to get to it. These are all the kind of things that are in the plan. They've worked out a plan, and the trick is to get that plan across to everybody. One of the things that I thought was interesting was Chief Paul Serra Chief Paul Serra. I've got my notes written on brown paper. Don't ever do that. Had mentioned about pollution and environmental impact, Mike Andrews was talking about all of the issues associated with driving and like that. Most people here, I think, are aware of the fact that if you've already got a rail line, you've already got pretty much most of the impact you're going to get, other than some noise pollution. You are safer, you are less impact on the environment. These are things that we need to remind those people that have forgotten about those things or may not be aware. Again, Al Arrington has talked about the negative impact of not having the train. One of the things that we've got going on here that I think is hugely exciting is Chief Gauthier and the emphasis on building relationships. And what I'm here to tell you right now is we've got relationships going on here, and that's great. But in reality, I'm standing up here preaching to people that are already converted. Everybody here knows what we want to accomplish. We've emphasized in a lot of ways how important it is. Now we need to go and do our own preaching to the rest of the masses. And for the most part, I'm talking about our elected officials. We've got some elected officials here. So we want to, first of all, say thank you. Second of all, we want to be loudly, frequently talking to them, calling them, writing them, and encouraging them to talk to their colleagues about what we're trying to do. I think a lot of us are very surprised we've got this much interest to have this many people on relatively short notice. If we're surprised, think how surprised the rest of the elected officials are. They don't know that this is happening, other than thank you, Lucille, again, for getting the word out. We need to tell them. There's a lot of people that want to make this happen, a lot of people that feel it's important, and that this is something that I, as a voter, that we in the North, okay, I'm from the South, you in the North, think is an important issue. And there may be fewer people here, but we are just as important. And we need to make sure that, for example, when was the last time that you talked or wrote an elected official? I'll bet just about everybody in this room has had some contact on that level. But when was the last time? Can you do it more often? I'll issue right now a personal challenge that each of you, within the next week, within the next couple of weeks, go out, reach out again. Tell them about the conference. Tell them about the interest. Tell them about the importance. That's how we get this thing moving. Small groups of committed, determined individuals can make great change. There was a statesman at one point, and I don't recall who it was, that said, there's an argument that they're the only people that ever do. Thank you.